One of the coalition government's top priorities is cutting the budget deficit. So in its comprehensive spending review, it set out a limit on what can be spent by all government departments, including the Department for Education. So what will the impact be on budgets and jobs in schools? And what do you need to know about other funding changes, such as the pupil premium?
It was the day that everyone had been waiting for, the comprehensive spending review setting out departmental budgets for the next 4 years. There was much trepidation as the government had already said in its emergency budget in June that current levels of public spending were completely unsustainable. And there'd already been a number of cuts to education budgets, an indication of more pain to come. In May, £670 million was trimmed from the 2010-2011 Department for Education budget. Then came a 2-year pay freeze for teachers and other school staff. And in July, the government cancelled the Building Schools for the Future programme. More recently, the government also terminated the contract for Teachers TV from April 2011. The whole process of a spending review takes weeks of negotiations, bargaining and even threats between the Treasury, which holds the money, and the departments who spend it. The final result of the process was announced in the Commons by the Chancellor George Osborne. After announcing big cuts to welfare, local government and universities, the Chancellor came to education.
There will be a real increase in the money for schools, not just next year or the year after, as the last government once promised, but for each of the next 4 years. The schools budget will rise from £35 billion to £39 billion. Even as pupil numbers greatly increase, we will ensure that cash funding per pupil does not fall. We will also sweep away all the different ways in which money is ring-fenced so that schools can decide how best to spend their money as they see fit.
Overall, George Osborne announced an increase in funding for the schools budget of £3.6 billion by the end of the spending review period, which, when you take account of inflation, amounts to a 0.1% increase in each of the next 4 years. However, the department as a whole is facing a real terms cut of over 3% over the next 4 years. Much of this comes from cutting capital spending, money for new buildings and refurbishment, by 60% in real terms over the next 4 years. The government is also going to end educational maintenance allowances from the next academic year and replace them with discretionary payments. Russell Hobby is the General Secretary for the National Association of Head Teachers. I asked him what he made of the spending review.
A great case of expectations management going on here, because we were all very happy with cuts, and to get us into that situation is quite spectacular. The department itself is taking quite a huge hit, probably about a third of its budget, 2,000 civil servants going. That's going to clearly impact their abilities to do things. But then down into local authorities, we can expect fairly savage cuts there, and therefore school support services, HR services, school improvement activities, they're all going to be hard to find, and where they do exist of much reduced quality and coverage.
Even before the CSR announcements, there were already authorities, knowing that they were likely to have less money, who had issued redundancy notices for teachers employed in those central services. And these are people who do direct classroom work. Then, of course, there's a whole range of other things that local authorities do. I mean, for example, we could see the end of libraries. Then, of course, there's the whole business about the pressure on school sports and other kinds of local facilities. Will swimming pools go? Will we have local leisure centres so that children can access those?
Now, the other significant change is the way the money is being distributed to schools. At the moment, some go through something called the Dedicated Schools Grant, and others go through specific grants for specific purposes. The government really wants to put it all into one pot. They say that will give head teachers the freedom to spend the money as they wish. That's a good idea, isn't it?
We actually take the view that, although it's talking about freeing up school budgets, the removal of any of the constraints in terms of specific and dedicated grants, we think is actually quite a problem, because it'll just throw money into a big pot, and that can then very easily be cut rather than being spent in the dedicated areas.
The week before the spending review, when anticipation of education cuts was building, the government tried to get some more positive headlines by announcing funding for a pupil premium.
The odds of a pupil on free school meals achieving 5 good GCSEs, including English and maths, are less than 1/3 of those of a pupil who is not on free school meals. Schools will receive additional funds to offer targeted help to every pupil eligible for free school meals and reduce educational inequalities. By the end of the spending review period, this pupil premium will grow to an additional £2.5 billion of investment each year.
Hackney Free School, serving a deprived area of London, is the sort of school likely to gain from a pupil premium. Around half of its students are on free school meals. So what does its head teacher, Richard Brown, make of the idea?
Oh, it's got to be a good thing, because for the first time that I can recall, a government is saying it costs more money to educate successfully students from disadvantaged backgrounds. But there are things that we already do that we'd be very keen to continue doing. So things like one-to-one tuition, small classes, specialist intensive literacy support. It's also an education which is after school, which is on Saturdays and which is during the course of the holidays. Now all of that needs funding.
In terms of the mechanism, is it free school meals? Is that the way to do it, or is it on postcodes? Or what do you think is the fairest, the most effective way of doing it?
Well, of course, the proxy, the general proxy, is free school meals. And the advantage to that is that it's well known and well understood. The disadvantage to it is, of course, that we know that there isn't universal uptake. And so if money is allocated on the basis of uptake of free school meals, it may militate against those schools where actually they have got lots of children from poorer families, but simply the families are not accessing those benefits to which they are absolutely entitled.
The pupil premium was supposed to be additional to the existing school's budget, but that's turned out not to be the case. Indeed, schools with relatively small numbers of pupils from poorer homes are likely to face a real terms budget cut. And indeed, the Education Secretary, Michael Gove, has now confirmed that some schools will lose money. Looking specifically at the school's budget, that's going to rise by 0.1% per year in real terms, but that's only if you include the extra money for the pupil premium, isn't it?
We do need to split it into those two sections, the dedicated schools grants and all the other money going into schools, which is flat in cash terms over these years. So we would be expecting a 3 to 4% decline in real budgets over each year for 4 years. Clearly, if you have a high percentage of pupils with free school meals, overall it's going to feel a lot better. It's not going to be back to the boom days, but you may well see an increase in your budget. If you're in more favoured circumstances, low percentages, then you are actually going to be talking about making savings and cuts in the years ahead.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies, an independent think tank, has calculated the likely winners and losers from the pupil premium. It estimates that 60% of primary age pupils will be in schools that will lose money, and at secondary level that figure rises to 87% of pupils. The government contests these calculations, but even schools such as Hackney Free are still unsure about what their financial position will be.
If you've got about 400 pupils eligible for free school meals, and if it were £2,000, I know we're making an assumption, you could be £800,000 a year better off.
I'm almost certain we won't be £800,000 better off, particularly as a specialist sports college. We've just lost money in terms of the specialism. We're also a full-service extended school, and we will lose money in that area. We've been highly successful since we've had more resources, and I don't just mean this school. We have doubled GCSE results in the last 2 years, but I also mean across inner London. There are now, I think, only 2 schools in inner London that are below the government's floor targets of 30% 5A to C, including English and Maths. That's because those schools that were below those floor targets have received significant extra resourcing in recent years. They've then delivered. They've actually shown that money equals improved results, which equals improved outcomes for students and their life chances.
There's no question about it, the spending review has marked a real watershed for schools. After many years of substantial above-inflation funding increases, we're now entering an age of austerity. And the pupil premium will change things even more, with many schools likely to emerge as winners, while others will find themselves having to make real cuts.